Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about the brand new limited edition NARS Ignited Eyeshadow Palette. Isn't that cover pretty? Here is a quick look at the inside before we go into more detail. So if you're interested in hearing my review on this palette, then just keep on watching. The Ignited Eyeshadow Palette from NARS is a 12-pan eyeshadow palette available exclusively on Sephora.com and the NARS Cosmetics site. I purchased it off of Sephora for $59. It is, again, limited edition, and this palette feels like the new NARS formula. So if you weren't aware, NARS just reformulated all of their eyeshadows. They kind of re-released their eyeshadows, and I have a video about the new NARS eyeshadow formula and the new cases that they come in, which are really nice. Like the singles actually pop out of all of the components, like the duos and the singles. You can actually pop out each of the shadows. Very cool. Anyway, I talk about how the eyeshadow formula is really kind of mysterious because they feel like when you go in and finger swatch, they feel so hard to the touch. Like they feel like you're not going to get any shadow at all, like you'd have to go in really, really hard. But that is so not true. You get a lot of pigment with just a simple swipe. So I want to say we have like 3 or 4 formulas in here. I feel like each column is slightly different from one another. I feel like this is a matte, this is a satin. These, I think, are their hardwired shadow formula where you get like a lot of glitter and reflection. There isn't that much of a heavy base, if you will, but they're a little bit more than just a top coat. So they're really interesting shadows. And then this, I feel like, is somewhere in between. They're a little bit more glittery and more shiny than these satins, but they're not quite as like chunky and textured as the hardwired shadows. So let me go ahead and show you some swatches. And I went up and down and across. So the first one is Hammamet 1. Next we have Sophia, and then we have Numea. Those 3 matte shadows are available as single individual shadows. The rest of these shadows I don't believe are. I don't know if they're exclusive to this palette, but I could not find them as single shadows on the NARS site. So we have St. Paul de Vence 1, Supernova, Fired Up, and then we have Light Up, In Heat, and Fuse. And Fuse is such a beautiful color. There's a lot of different colored micro glitters going on in that shade. Really beautiful. And then for the last column, we have Atomic, Ignition, and Point Noir. So I did want to compare this palette to the Wanted palette, which is another 12-pan limited edition NARS palette that came out, I want to say, this past summer. Now, when I look at this quickly, I don't think that they're similar, but there are actually a lot of similar shades in here. So in the Wanted palette, we have these 2 matte shades. And then in the Ignited palette, we have these 2 matte shades. And I think that they look very similar. So here are some swatches of those 4 colors. So that is from left to right. That's Seven Heaven and Shadow Hill from the Wanted palette. And then on the right we have Hammamet and Sophia from the Ignited palette. Next I have this color in the Wanted palette, and this one is called Mendoza. And I wanted to compare that with Ignition over here in the Ignited palette. So on the left we have Mendoza from the Wanted palette, and on the right we have Ignition from the Ignited palette. So they look similar in the pan. I think they could maybe pass for a similar shade on the lid, but the Wanted palette Ignition color is much brighter. It has a much more rosy pinky base than the Mendoza shade, which is a little bit more copper. And then I thought this Wicked Game shade looked very similar to Fired Up shade in the Ignited palette. So on the left we have Wicked Game from the Wanted palette, and then we have Fired Up on the right from the Ignition palette. And again, the Ignition palette just looks a little bit brighter than the Wanted palette. Other than those 4 shades, I don't see any others that are close or very similar between the 2 palettes, but they definitely have a similar vibe. I want to say that the Wanted palette is probably a little bit more neutral leaning This one definitely really kind of like commits to a very pinky purple color story. When I opened up the Ignited palette, I was a little bit surprised at how warm this palette was. I don't know if my mind was kind of playing tricks on me when I saw like the cover of this, and I looked at it and I said to myself, oh, a pink purple palette. I immediately kind of just was expecting a cooler toned eyeshadow palette, but this is very, very warm. The mattes are very warm, and that's usually, at least for me, that's where I start. So you're giving yourself a very warm base, and all the other colors are gonna kind of play off of that. And then we have these satins here, which are very, again, very, very warm undertones. I want to say there are like 4 cool toned shadows in here. That's this row, this like hardwired shadow row, and then this shadow up there. Those are definitely the coolest, but even like this one leans a little bit warm. In terms of performance, I think that these shadows are great. I am a big fan of this new NARS eyeshadow palette. I think they're so interesting. Again, they just feel really, really hard, but you get this like really smooth, silky powder pigment, and they blend really well. They're pigmented really nicely. I just think the formula is just really, really interesting. Let me show you some cutaways of me doing this look that I have on today. I used the Hammamet color all over the lid, and I didn't really powder my face today, so I wanted to get like a nice powder base down before I applied the other shadows. Then I used the Sophia shade, this darker matte shade, and I started to just add a little bit more dimension to my eyes and this entire eye look. And then I wanted to start playing around with more of the shiny shimmer shades. I went into this Supernova shade, and I put that all over my lid from the inner corner all the way out to that darker Sophia matte shade. And then I went into this shade, this Point Noir shade. Since this was the darkest shade in the palette, I wanted to use that to kind of deepen up the outer corner of my eye. I also used it to line my lower lash line. And I was a little bit wary because this is sort of a glittery shade, and I didn't know if it was just going to be overkill. But the base of this color is so deep that I think I ended up with kind of like a nice smoky effect with not too much glitter. And then I took this Hardwired Light Up shade, this really light, bright color. I put that just over in the inner portion of my lid, my inner corner, a little bit on my lower lash line. And that shadow gave me a little bit of fallout, not as much as I was expecting actually, but I did get some fallout. I saw some glitters kind of end up on my cheekbone, a little bit on the bridge of my nose, but that's it, not too crazy. And then finally, I went back into this Sophia shade to kind of blend out the upper portion of my eye look. And I used that new Sonia G Crease Pro brush, and it was fantastic. After blending everything out with the Sophia and that Crease Pro brush, I did notice that when I was going over some of these more glittery shades that I did get a little bit more like additional fallout. Nothing too much, but I did notice just, like a few more droplets on my cheekbones here. So I just kind of wiped those away, and I feel like I'm pretty in the clear. I really, really like this palette, but I hesitate actually recommending this palette because there are so many shimmers and glitters in here. This, I think, is like NARS answer to like a holiday palette. This, I think, creates a really wonderful holiday look. I think when I use these 2 shades and then went in with this one, if I stopped there, I had a nice kind of like wearable everyday kind of look. By adding anything from these 2 columns, I think just automatically amps up your look. You kind of automatically have this kind of evening look. Of course, I am generalizing. If you're a big fan of like really glittery, micro glittery eyeshadow and you wear it day and night, this palette is going to be your friend. But no, if you purchase this palette, you're going to get a lot of micro glittery shadows. And I've had this palette on for about 4 hours now, and I see like a little bit of additional fallout there. Not a ton. I don't feel like all of my eyeshadow has just fallen off of my lids, but I definitely see a few more glints of glitter on my cheekbones. But I did want to let you guys know that I did get additional fallout throughout my wear of these shadows. So that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. Let me know if you have any questions down below in the comment section, and subscribe if you haven't already. I will see you in my next video.